If you work hard, you get the same luck and same opportunities as other people who also work hard.
Is that so? Well, I am curious to know if the hard work you put into making this video is going to provide you with the luck and opportunities you were hoping for.
I personally take offense when people want to separate white people from people of color.
Well, yeah, you should take offense to that. You know, segregation is bad. Passed a law about it back in the 60s, you know, saying that it was bad. So yeah. Why do I get the feeling, though, that that's not where you're going with this?
Are you saying there's a status difference between you and I? Because I don't see it that way.
No, I am not a person of color. I thought that was pretty obvious from my profile picture, or possibly the many videos that I have that, had you reviewed prior to this, would have maybe made you reconsider making this video. Did you need a closer look? I mean, I know I'm tan this time of year. It's hot out here, but like I assure you, I am Casper level Caucasian. Anyway, I'm really terribly sorry that your privilege is so offensive to you, and those damn underprivileged communities should really be more considerate about how their lack of privilege makes you feel offended about your privilege.
Mother doesn't see it that way.
Mama says shit you can't repeat on the internet, apparently. And before we go any further, I'm taking all bets on whether or not Movember Mike Pence knows the definition of anecdote.
She came here from a third world country. She would meet that criteria of a low-income neighborhood. She could have used that as reasons to say being wealthy is not for me. That's not what she did.
Sir, that may be the dumbest fucking thing I have ever heard in my 32 years on this planet. It is in fact so dumb that I just took my glasses off so I could squint to make sure I was hearing how dumb it was correctly. What you just insinuated is that there is people living in abject poverty, sitting in their rundown apartments, in their crime-riddled neighborhoods, with their underfunded schools, their lack of access to health care and good nutrition. And these people just look around and they have a conversation with themselves saying, you know, I could just get up and be wealthy today. That's definitely an option that I have at any given moment. But having money for food, you know, it's just not for me. Being wealthy sounds great and everything, but have you tried being malnourished? Man, it'll change your life.
She worked her way up to a upper middle class livelihood. None of it had to do with her being a person of color. None of it had to do with coming from a low-income neighborhood. It came from her hard work and perseverance.
So who bet that he knew what an anecdote was? Anybody? Anyone?
Those who put in the work, the right amount of work, making the right connections, greasing the right elbows.
Hold up. Did you just say greasing the right elbows? That is not an expression. There's elbow grease, which is like putting hard physical effort into something, like sanding a hardwood floor. And then there's greasing palms, which is one way to make connections because it's bribery. And bribery, I've heard, is a great tool for success. But generally, to successfully bribe people, you need to have money to bribe them with. And something that poor people tend not to have a lot of is money. Because they're poor.
If we put in the correct amount of work, we do have the same opportunity to have luck and opportunities. I don't know if that makes sense.
You don't know if that makes sense because it doesn't. First off, thank you for telling us a story about your mom that is completely and utterly irrelevant. Despite it being the punchline to every joke, we cannot statistically quantify your mom. But we can statistically quantify how much more likely you are to be successful simply for being white. And we can also statistically quantify how much more likely you are to be successful simply by being born into a middle-class household versus a low-income one. In fact, only 5% of kids who never experienced poverty as a child are poor at the age of 25. However, 46% of children who grow up in poverty are still in poverty at the age of 25. And then add that statistic onto the fact that only 11% of white children grow up in poverty compared to 27% of Hispanic children, 31% of African American children, and 34% of Native American children. And whereas 90% of kids who don't grow up in poverty graduate high school, only 62% of impoverished children get a diploma. If you think that's bad, 70% of kids who never experience poverty go on to college, compared to only 23% of impoverished children. And that's for the poor kids who even even make it to adulthood because kids who grow up in poverty are 5 times more likely to die in accidents. Life tends to be a little more unsafe for kids whose families can't afford functioning smoke detectors or safe vehicles to drive. And even if they do make it out of their childhood and out of poverty alive, they're still not out of the woods because kids who grow up in poverty are more likely to develop chronic illnesses like asthma and diabetes and obesity because turns out growing up in houses with like asbestos and poor ventilation and only having access to cheap, shitty food all has long-term health consequences. Now, I don't know if you've heard, but going to the doctor here in the great United States, that alone can put you in poverty. Not to mention chronic health issues make you more likely to miss work and make it a lot harder to succeed, and that can bankrupt you even without the crushing medical debt. And if that wasn't enough, growing up in poverty negatively affects brain development as well. See, stress hormones, which poor kids have a lot of because turns out being poor is stressful, can inhibit your memory, which explains a lot for me. It affects your brain's ability to regulate your moods, and it permanently alters your brain's physical structure, which means it makes it harder to learn, it makes it harder to interact with society, and guess what? That makes it harder to be successful, especially when poor kids are growing up in poor, shitty fucking schools that don't teach them all that well to begin with. And all of that is before we get into the deeply entrenched systematic racism in this country. Racism you apparently don't see because there's a neck blocking your view from your colon. You know, there was the historical racism that kept African Americans in poverty, like, slavery and then segregation and redlining and black codes. And despite you thinking racism is over, apparently, African Americans still only make like 70 cents on the dollar compared to white people. And it's even worse for Hispanics at like 60 cents on the dollar. Or the fact that minorities with white-sounding names are literally twice as likely to get a call back for job interviews than one with ethnic-sounding names. Also, African Americans are half as likely to be selected for promotions over their white counterparts. The list goes on. I'm just kidding, guys. None of that's real. Yeah, I almost fell for all those facts and statistics and reality. But Jonas came along and proved to me that none of that's true with a story about his mommy. Good thing, too, because I was starting to look real foolish talking about how income inequality and racism exists. And as a token of my appreciation for setting me straight with what Mama said, I hope that this connection between you and me that you greased elbows and worked really hard to get, I hope it earns you all the luck and opportunity you deserve.